Welcome back, everybody, to the podcast. Today we are diving into the mind of Grant Wilson. Grant Wilson is the UK brand director for IWC watches. Now, for those of you that don't know what IWC is, they're a luxury watch brand that is worldwide. They're world renowned. They're owned by the Richemont Group, which was recently valued at 165 billion. And IWC's annual revenue in 2021 was 600 million. Today, we're going to be talking about how Grant became the IWC brand director, as well as some intricacies and also some secrets of the luxury watch industry. My name is Harrison Brown, and if you're watching this, I hope it helps. Grant, so when I was doing my research on you, and I've had the pleasure of working with you for a couple of years, you actually used to work at Rolls-Royce. And it's funny how those luxury industries kind of intertwine. So talk me through your career. Where did it start for you?
Well, straight out of uni, I worked at B&W UK. Mm-hmm. I did that for a couple of years. And while I was at B&W had acquired Rolls-Royce. So VW had acquired Bentley and B&W had acquired Rolls-Royce. And the way that contract all worked in that acquisition process was that VW would take on Bentley and the manufacturing facility and the people and the cars and the engines, etc. Actually, engines were B&W. And so for B&W, they had to find a new manufacturing facility, a new workforce, a new dealer network. They had to build a new car from scratch. They had to design a new car from scratch. And so really it was a completely clean canvas. And while that was happening, there was opportunities to come and work at Rolls-Royce. If you're part of the B&W group, you can come and work at Rolls-Royce. And I found that, I loved being at B&W. It gave me a good grounding, but the opportunity to be, and at the beginning, nobody knew if it was going to work. This was a vanity project for the group, and a couple of years, and a lot of people saying, don't do it. It's a bad move. But for me, I felt there was great opportunity to do something at quite a low level that could be quite meaningful in that setup. And I found that really exciting. The downside of working for the group, the B&W group, was, when I started, you kind of had your job. It was a 9-to-5 job. You were a specialist in that area. You couldn't deviate from that area. And it was a great place to kind of get the basics, but I felt quite frustrated in that process, and making the transition over to Rolls-Royce. You had to be a jack of all trades but a master of none. You had to set up the dealer network. You had to worry about logistics of getting the cars out. We were working when the manufacturing facility wasn't even completely finished. You were dealing with the end clients. You were dealing with wholesale partners. You were directly feeding back to the CEO and the board of directors, and it was a dream job for me because at the time, it was just so many pegs down in terms of having any access to anybody super senior at B&W. It's just impossible. So for me, it was great being kind of, inverted commas, a big fish in a small pond, if you like. Whereas at B&W, it's the complete opposite. I love that. And you
always had a luxury car love, let's say.
I did, yeah.
And I know that, and I'll ask you about your car later. So you always had a love for luxury cars. So 2 years in BMW,
yeah.
And then 16 years in Rolls-Royce?
Yeah, 16 years at Rolls-Royce in Goodwood.
And where did you start and where did you finish your kind of trajectory through Rolls-Royce?
Yeah, so it was a sales coordinator role back in the early turn of the millennium. And at the time, they gave me the West Coast of America and Asia Pacific. And if you just think about that from a time zone perspective, it was ridiculous. I was living in Chiswick at the time, and I was commuting an hour and a half to get into Goodwood from from West London, and then I had to look after Asia Pacific, so really early in the morning, and then West Coast of America was really late in the afternoon.
Sleep during the day.
It was ridiculous, but luckily that didn't stay like that for too long, because it was just impossible to look after both the partners there. So I did loads of sales roles, and then in 2010 I was moved to become a general manager for Europe. At the time, Europe was split into 3 sections. It was the UK, which I never looked after the UK, and then Europe South and Europe North. And during that period of time I looked after both regions. But that was great because you get to all the sunny places like Marbella and Monaco and
Living it up.
the south of France. It was great, except I would be the only person, wearing a suit, and everybody else would be, on the, in their flip flops and shorts. And it was great because you always fly on EasyJet, but you get picked up at a Rolls Royce. So that was a great way to bring you back down. So you get dropped off by the dealer in a Rolls Royce to get on your EasyJet flight.
Pick you up to drop you again.
Exactly. They always made sure that you, you never got ahead of yourself. And that was great. But then you also got to a crazy place like Moscow. Some of my craziest stories and times were supporting the dealer in Moscow. That was and St. Petersburg as well. It was a beautiful place at the time. Yeah.
And what is your favourite Rolls Royce? If you had to pick,
it would be a Phantom Coupe Aviator edition. So the fact that IWC has a close link to aviation, it was a really beautiful. The Phantom Coupe was probably the connoisseur's car. We did the least of them. I think there's probably only 250 of them in existence. And then the Aviator, yeah, I think so. And then don't quote me on that, but the Aviator was a really super small volume edition, but had this beautiful tunnel finisher, really beautiful pieces of machinery putting in. It was a really elegant execution, and it's quite a selfish purchase because it's not a car that you can really take a whole family with you. I love the look and the lines. For me, that was a really beautiful car.
Yeah, and there's so many similarities in the luxury industry between cars and watches, because you don't need a really expensive car, just like you don't need a really expensive watch.
For sure.
So quite a lot of the time, they're a very sentimental purchase, and you need a lot of marketing and emotion behind that.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the biggest attraction, that the similarities between cars, because cars and watches go hand in hand?
Yeah.
Do you think that's the kind of similarity there?
Yeah, I think that takes me back to my love for watches came from being in the luxury car business, because you'd go to the south of France or you'd go to wherever it was, where in the one consistency was the biggest commodity for our clients was time, and the one thing they all had in common was watches.
Yeah.
There was a real passion for watches, so I kind of it switched me onto it. And I was at the beginning, it was I need to understand that, because you want to engage in conversations. You want to, when you go out for a dinner, you can't just talk about cars all night long. Although inevitably
we probably
did.
would.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of wanted I've said it before, jack of all trades but master of none. You had to know a little bit about a lot and be able to eloquently try to get some of the key points. So it's like at the beginning, watches were I need to understand it so I can talk about it, I can converse in conversation. And then once you go down that rabbit hole, you don't come back out. Yeah, exactly. And I love watches, and at that point I was really hooked.
And why? So you were working at Rolls-Royce. You've got this amazing career with Rolls-Royce, and then you start looking into watches. So what attracted you to IWC? Because there's so many watch brands out there. What was it about IWC?
Well, to be honest, I wasn't looking. It was the press communications director at Rolls. I couldn't see, to be really honest, I couldn't see where my next role was at Rolls-Royce. So I kind of hit a bit of a plateau in terms of because it was quite small. Other than going back into the B&W group and doing a job perhaps in Munich or something, I just didn't. It wasn't. I loved my time there, but I couldn't see myself doing that. And so the press communication director approached me and said, "Look, this not that we want you to leave, but this job's come up. We know you love watches. You should have a look at it." So I just kind of at the beginning, I just sent my CV off. I didn't think anything of it. And then they telephone interviewed me and got through to the next stage. And I thought, okay, I'll take this a bit more seriously. And it turned into like a mammoth job. I don't think they were at all convinced that they wanted me.
It took a while.
Yeah, but I think if you ask anybody that knows me, I'm quite a tenacious person. And I thought, well, one thing that I will make sure that nobody else will do is put as much effort into wanting this job as much as... So I went overboard, I started doing... They didn't ask me to do any of that, but I started doing mystery shops. I wanted to have a base understanding of where IWC was in the UK, what made good service. I went to the boutique in New Bond Street. I went to an authorised dealer.
This is all before you employed?
All before I did, just part of, I was determined to get the job. And when you've got the bit between your teeth, you're
Yeah.
determined to get it. And I thought, well, nobody's going to at least put more energy into this than me. There may be smarter people, there may be people that could actually do the job better than me, but I was determined that nobody would do it. Nobody would put as much energy in. So I ended up doing like 3 mystery shops. I did like a grey market dealer, I did an authorised dealer, and I went to the boutique and I did my assessment of that. And then I said what I would do in my first 90 days. I said how I would activate our sponsorships more. And then I went to professional printers and they printed it all up for me. So, I went OTT. It was ridiculous. I went OTT and spent every waking hour working on this. But it was really protracted. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that, but it was. It was like 4 interviews. It was multiple trips to Schaffhausen. And I think it was because, and credit to the team, or thankfully for me, it's quite difficult to come into the industry at that level without working for a watch brand, or at least that was my perception.
So you went straight into the UK director role?
I went straight into the UK director role. I hadn't done like a sales director role, I hadn't done like a marketing role, I hadn't worked my way through the watch industry. And I think, although I'm not entirely sure, I think what Chris was looking for is just a different perspective, a different look at how the business could be run and how it could be presented. And obviously there's close links with automotive and IWC. We're really closely connected with things like Formula One, and we have a really strong relationship at Goodwood. So there was a lot of synergies that I felt really emotionally connected to. And I had a real passion for the brand as well. It's IWC is always known as the engineering brand, and being someone that was interested in engineering, I found a kinship there.
Yeah, and I think I can see that. I think I can see the different perspective that maybe Chris and the IWC team were looking for within you.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that you put so much effort into this job that you didn't yet have, it says a lot about your personality.
Yeah, but I remember my interview with Chris, and it didn't at all go to how I had it in my head.
Oh, it never does. It never does.
No, but I had as I said, I'd done all these presentations, and with Mark, who was the chief commercial officer, it was quite structured, and he wanted to understand what I knew about the network and how I would go about it, and it was all quite structured. And Mark said, we're going to need to have you Chris wants to have some time with you. And Chris had noticed, either on my LinkedIn profile, somehow he'd noticed that I'd studied at Bournemouth University. And Chris
did a deep dive on you.
And Chris was at Bournemouth University. He was, I think, there was like a year's difference. So, and I didn't know him at all at Bournemouth Uni. So when I sat down, it was straight into Bournemouth University talk. Were you at the fire station? Talking about different, which was the student union. And it was just caught me by surprise, because I was expecting him to ask me questions about my background, about watches, and he just wanted to have a chat. And I came out of it and I was like, I didn't get any of the points that I wanted to get across. I have no idea. And Mark said, how did it go? Because I think Mark at that point was quite invested in me as well. And he was like, how did it go? I was like, not sure. We just talked about like
stuff
over a table, like he would about someone that was at the same university, and some of the stories that we picked up there. But it was great, and he put me at ease instantly, and
that's how it should be though. It's a bit like today. I think that a lot of people, and we've had people walk into a room before when there's cameras and there's lights, and they kind of are deer in headlights, and they're not themselves.
Yeah.
But then you have a chat with them and you ask them how the kids are, and and all of a sudden the real personality comes out.
Yeah.
I think that kind of new perspective really shone through to me with IWC's marketing.
Yeah.
And I've been following the brand for a while because I've been in the industry, but over the last 3 years in particular, I think you and the team have had a huge impact on the marketing of the watch industry, because it is an old-fashioned-ish industry.
Yeah, it is.
And I think the one that was most prevalent to me was the IWC container.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. How was that conceptualized? Do you get a budget from IWC and then you pitch it to the board? Or how does that work?
Yeah, kind of. So every year we do our business plans, and it's quite a big thing. It's a big chunk of work, but it's I remember when I first did it, I was really intimidated by the whole process, and I also felt there was so much time being put into this that I felt I was needed elsewhere when I first started the whole business plans. but it's such a useful investment of time because it allows you to do a deep dive into your business, understand where the business is today, where the business is going to be, and where you want to grow the business, what mechanisms you've got within your ability to kind of grow the business as well. And so within the business plan template, we created obviously our marketing plan. And I remember that year when we presented it, it was the original concept, I think, that we presented was these kind of Formula One trucks that turn up to the whichever Formula One race they're going to, and they open up into a great big huge experience center with pop-ups here, there and everywhere. So in our head it was originally like a Formula One truck. And I think when we pitched it, I think Chris liked the idea of it, but I think he saw the shipping containers working really well because they're quite rugged. They're quite, I just felt he could see a consistency. You could take multiple shipping containers and then pop them in different key cities. So I felt like we were part of that process.
Yeah.
But Chris is such a creative person. I couldn't see a shipping container turning into what we ended up delivering, and that's down to Chris and the HQ team as well. But it was great for us because literally we could pop it up and put it into a key city like Edinburgh or like in the centre of Manchester or in Covent Garden in London. And it gave us our ability to kind of do brand awareness that hadn't really been done before in a conventional sense. The people that had no clue about the brands could come and see the product, have an experience, talk to someone that was passionate about watches and showcase them. And we had everybody coming into that container, people that had no clue about watches at all, to people that were massive watch enthusiasts but hadn't ever felt comfortable in, which hopefully we're addressing, didn't feel comfortable in going into a boutique environment or going into an authorized dealer. So I think it kind of pulled down the curtain on that and just gave people an opportunity to get, with the product that it was, they could touch and they could feel it, they could feel the tact. Obviously we had a big amount of security. Yeah, there was a bit of a security headache when we came up with the concept, but but I love that, and I loved that whole process of doing something that hadn't been done before. It was a bit of a test. It was, I guess we were the kind of the guinea pigs, but it was great in terms of us being able to really get some traction on that brand awareness in the UK, and that was really part of the start of this big impulse, this big push on brand awareness.
And I think that comes down to the kind of experiential luxury market. A luxury product, as I said before, anyone can buy a watch. Yeah. And anyone can buy a car. Yeah. Because it goes A to B or watch tells the time. But that experience is what makes you buy into the brand. Yeah. And what the genius thing about that was, as well as marketing, because you were putting a G-Wagon outside and everything, it was amazing, and you had this amazing experience. You were marketing, but you were also giving that experience in a really fun way and a really unique way. And what I've struggled with within Chisholm Hunter, when Drew and I are doing the YouTube and the social media, all that kind of stuff, is kind of attributing sales to views or sales to what we're doing.
Yeah. A lot of the return on investment.
Exactly, the ROI. So a lot of what we do is kind of you could call it prospecting. Yeah. We're putting something out, it might not work, but if it does, say it gets 10,000 views, 20,000 views, 30,000 views, it's very hard to correlate that with sales. Yeah. Because they will bounce away from the video, but in a year's time, they might bounce back.
Sure.
How did you, with the IWC Roadshow, did you see a correlation between each stage and the sales? Did they follow suit? I know you can't say
but I think the priority, which may sound counterintuitive, but the priority wasn't about how many watches we could sell from that pop-up exhibition. It was a brand awareness exercise first and foremost. It was the ability for people to engage in the product, have conversations, understand. There's part of, if you remember the first container we did, there's like a storytelling part of the shipping container where you could find out about F.A. Jones and Schaffhausen and our affinity and our relationship with aviation watches and military watches, as well as things like I think IWC is known as the engineering brand. We're not really an artisan brand, like some of the beautiful watch maisons that you see in the French side of Switzerland, where we're close to the German border. So we're very kind of utilitarian, kind of engineering, and you see that kind of translates into the product. And so for people to see the functionality, the form follows function elements to the watch, I think it allowed us to create our, for those that weren't so familiar with the brand or so familiar with luxury watches, it set us aside, and show how IWC was different. And for us, that was the number one priority was watches are becoming more popular. And if you say to the average Joe on the street, name me a watch brand, probably say one or two brands that that most people would say, and that's kind of like an ambition, a personal ambition for myself, is for us to be that known brand, but without deviating from who we are, not trying to dilute the brand image in any way. We know we're great at making military, aviation, pilots' watches, chronographs, engineering case materials. We have a rich provenance of history. Our founder was an American that came over and set up, and all of those really rich stories we still are true to, but we try to kind of deliver it or showcase it in a less conventional way.
Yeah, and that's the difference between IWC and other brands within the watch industry as a whole, as I see, because they can be quite old-fashioned, some of them, and I think that's beginning to change now, but it's slower than fashion and the rest of it. And I think luxury in general normally moves slower because people have a sentimental attachment to it instead of it just being style.
Yeah.
So if you look at fashion, it changes every 3 months, and people think that's cool, I'll buy it. Whereas IWC or other watches, they think it's a sentimental attachment. I don't really care as much about the style because I'm buying into the brand, which I think is really important. You obviously have this incredible team surrounding you, and Drew and I saw that at the IWC Roadshow. Mm-hmm. Really amazing. And one thing that Drew and I really took from that was that you have a really good relationship with these people. Yeah, like they're your best pals because you work with them all the time.
Family.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how it should be. I think. Talk to me about your management style when it comes to people, because you've built this great team. Nobody can do this sort of stuff alone. When you have a goal in mind, you need people to help you.
Yeah, sure.
Talk to me about that kind of management process.
Well, as I said, during my time at Rolls-Royce, I was a specialist in nothing, and I still think that I'm not really an expert in anything really. And so for me, it was just surrounding myself with people that are great at what they do, and you see that whether it's in my marketing team or in the sales team or in the boutiques, they are absolute masters at what they do. Yeah, and I'm just not a micromanager. I just don't think that's helpful. So I think trust is key, and I trust them. Hopefully they trust me, and communication's key. I think having this kind of regular dialogue with everybody in the team is paramount, and hunger index. Really, that's probably the one thing that I say to everyone. I really appreciate people that are hungry to be on the same journey. We try to communicate every month. We get everyone into the boutique. So if you're in New Bond Street or Battersea, which are our internal boutiques, but we try to communicate as much as we can about where we're tracking, what we've done, what marketing activations we're doing, where we want to be at the end of the year, where we want to be in the next 3 to 4 years, and not be, it shouldn't be a surprise for people to understand where the business is going. I try to take, and it's not my journey, it's it's the direction of the business, but we try to be as transparent as that. As transparent with that as much as possible, so that everybody feels really engaged in that, and they all feel like they're part of something that's making something that's making a meaningful change. And I really believe that. I really believe the team are fully behind that drive to kind of really do more than what we've done before.
Just a quick one, guys. I need to pause this conversation with Grant really, really quickly, because day to day, I get a ton of questions regarding my jewellery and regarding my watches. And this is because we run the Chisholm Hunter YouTube channel. So people will stop me and ask where I get my watches from and where I get my jewellery from. And the answer is always Chisholm Hunter. They're a family-owned business for 165 years plus, which is pretty incredible. They have 28 stores throughout the UK, and they deal in luxury watches and diamonds. So if you're looking for something for yourself, a watch for yourself, or you're looking for something for your other half, maybe an engagement ring, make sure you head to chisholmhunter.co.uk. That's chisholmhunter.co.uk. IWC are a brand new sponsor to the podcast. And it's quite fitting because today we're talking to the brand director, the UK brand director of IWC. They are incredible watches. And I think my favorite IWC model so far is their new Engineer model. Now, for those that are into watches, this watch was actually designed by Gerald Genta, who is a legend in the luxury watch industry. And the good thing about Chisholm Hunter alongside IWC is that Chisholm Hunter actually stock IWC. So if you want a new IWC watch, you can head to IWC, of course, but you can also head to Chisholm Hunter. What became very prevalent to me, especially when I saw your marketing in the container, Drew and I were speaking after it, and we thought that your team was absolutely phenomenal. And I think they've really contributed to this marketing success that IWC are having. And obviously, you can be the jack of all trades, but you can't master one.
Yeah.
How do you go about getting those professionals for each roles? What's the kind of process like? Do you employ from other luxury watch houses, or do you kind of employ from without? What's your personal stand on that?
I think it all depends on the role that you're recruiting for. I think, and if I look at the boutique team in Battersea, which we just opened a new boutique in Battersea about 6 months ago, I think only one of them have come from the watch industry, or actually they were actually at a IWC boutique in a different country, and I think half of them have had luxury experience working at a luxury fashion house, but I'd say at least half of the team haven't had luxury experience and never sold watches in their lives. And I think for me personally, it's the hunger index. It's the one thing that I really look for when we're doing recruitment.
You can't teach.
And you can't teach it. And if they are really passionate about it, I think if someone's come in and done a lot of research, can identify, what watch I'm wearing and what they feel that they can contribute to this and to the role that they're applying for, and how they feel they can make a difference and feel like an individual, but it's likewise work in a team dynamics. I think for me, that's you kind of have a bit of a gut in terms of like knowing whether that person's going to be, a real asset for the team. And then, I don't think it's a prerequisite that you have to, at least for me personally, to have a luxury background. I think it's just, I think we look at everything on a case by case basis.
And how do you instill, because your team, especially when you were around each other at the IWC Roadshow, you're out for drinks at night, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this.
But it's true. We're a family. I think we're a family. I think that's it. We're as you quite rightly said, I'm not the master of anything. I have to know a little bit about a lot, and I guess what I try to do is set the vision. Obviously there's clear guidelines from HQ, and then it's kind of how we interpret it that locally, how we're going to try to develop a plan locally and kind of make sure that we hit the vision and the targets and the aspirations that we have for the brands locally as well. And it's just setting that vision and then making sure that we're on the right journey to get there. And so regular communication with the team, which is really critical. So, we try to get everyone together at least once a month, the big whole wide team, and let people know kind of where we're tracking, not just in terms of sales, but what marketing events, what marketing activities we've done, whether it was a success or not. And when I say a success, not necessarily in terms of like return on investment, but we set KPIs. We're quite analytical in terms of like how we look at our business, but we're quite creative in terms of setting new aspirations, things that haven't been done before, things that other maisons in the watch industry haven't done. I think we're quite hungry to do stuff like that. But then we test it and see if it kind of hits some of the KPI is the wrong word, but some of the yardsticks that we've set for ourselves in terms of like, did it do that? And I think communication's key then. Making sure everyone's aware of where the brand's going, what we're trying to do, where we are today, where we'll be tomorrow, where we want to be in the next 3 to 4 years, and just having that constant communication and making everyone feel like they're part of that, I think is super key. And just trusting the team and being really transparent with them and making sure that if there is an issue, we nip it in the bud. And there is issues, and we do have frustrations, and sometimes things don't go to plan. And I think, at least from an external perspective, you'll never see that. I will say like we're a swan. You know, on the outside you're kind of looking very elegant, and underneath you kind of and it is a little bit like that as well. But at the end of the day, we're in it together, and we celebrate success. I think that's really important. In fact.
And what would be your advice in just a couple of words, because you kind of summed it up there, but if someone that's watching this that maybe is beginning to manage a team, and maybe has 3 or 4 people in different areas that they're managing, what would be your advice to really motivate that team, to set the goals and to really get them driven towards them?
I think it's trying to identify, at least for me, it's trying to identify what the strengths are, or what the aspirations or the passion points are for the individual, and then seeing how that aligns with the big picture, and then trying to get the best out of them in terms of aligning their passion and their interest and their enthusiasm and their excitement, align that with our vision. And I think if the hunger index is high, I always talk about hunger index, but if it's super high, then they will naturally succeed in what they're doing, and just trying to keep them on track. I don't micromanage anyone. You know, for me, I'm the complete opposite to that. It's just making sure that we're steering the ship in the right direction, but everybody understands what the end goal is or what the roadmap is, but making sure they have their own individual aspirations and their own strengths and their own passions to get there.
And you've got a family now. You're a family man.
Yes.
Have you had any struggles in terms of you're extremely, but every time I see you, you're doing something different. You've always got a structure, a schedule. You're always doing something.
Yeah.
Are you finding it difficult in terms of balancing the
Yes.
family life?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I always say to my team, family first, and I put my family first, of course, but I'm not always the best at doing what I say. In the sense that our schedules are crazy. My wife works; she's got quite a big job as well, so she travels a lot as well. So we have to kind of schedule our calendars kind of months in advance. So there's not much. There's not much flexibility or agility in our life. But we always try to put family first. And I'm a big believer in making sure that we take time to have quality time with the family, because that's the most important thing. All of this, we're not saving lives. It's, we're selling watches. So family first.
Yeah. And in terms of when you were moving up within the industry, it's a new industry for you, the watch industry. Did you ever get any kind of anxieties or imposter syndrome, or feeling like you don't really belong there?
Still now.
So do you think you still get imposter syndrome?
Yeah, of course. I think I don't think that will ever leave me, because I try to answer this now. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm bad at, and I think the key bit for me is recognizing that I can't do it all, and that there's people in the team that are much better at doing certain things than I am, and letting them get on and just do it, and so I feel much more comfortable with that than I ever did in the past. But I feel that sense of I think it's healthy as well to feel that sense of responsibility. We're quite a big team. We've got big aspirations, and we've got a real sniper approach in terms of how we get there. But if it doesn't work, I always said to my team, "You've got my permission to fail." And I remember interviewing for the job, and I said to Chris, you need to give me permission to fail, because there'll be certain things that we won't get right. And I would much prefer to take that approach than just do what's been done before. My predecessor had done the role for years and years and years, and it was very clear to me really at the beginning that I couldn't do what he did, and I'm still in contact with him today. I couldn't do what he did because he was the master at that. So I had to just bring my skill set, my experience, and do it the way that I felt was the most appropriate way forward.
And do you think that you have, I know that when I was talking to Harry, the CEO of Schaffhausen, he really doesn't, he's very uncomfortable with giving up control.
Yeah.
And is that prevalent in you as well? Do you think that you really need to trust someone in terms of when you give them control of a certain area?
I don't think so, to be honest. I understand that, but I don't think that's me. I think I trust in the team that, if you're specialist in an area you know, whether it be marketing or whether it be sales or whether it's working in the boutique or whether it's strategy, you know, that we've recruited them to do a job, and they've mastered that. They know, they're kind of really in tune with, as long as we're all on that same, they've got the big picture, they know what we're trying to achieve and the direction of which we're going. I'm immensely relaxed with not feel like I need to micromanage or give up control or have to be involved in the nitty-gritty of every single detail. I think it's much more important that I've got I always say, like, the satellite view. You know, I say to my team, so my first line, I always say, you've got to have the helicopter view. You've got to kind of be able to come down operationally and look at the business, but also make sure that you're not getting stuck and drawn into continuous operational day-to-day parts of the business, because you will never be able to see the big picture.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the ability to kind of have that short to medium vision. What's going to happen to the business over the next few years? How do we move the business from where we are today to where we want to be? What are the mechanisms for doing that? And I think as long as I've got that big vision and I can try to communicate that in the best way forward, then it trickles down. I don't need to be the master of everything.
And how do you something in my life that I've really struggled with actually is I'm a very detailed person.
Yeah.
I edit videos.
Yeah.
I'm extremely Drew will tell you all about this. I'm very detailed in terms of exactly what we need, and there's a structure behind everything, and there's an efficient way of doing everything.
Yeah.
It's just me. How do you keep that big picture? Have you got any techniques or anything that you do in order to take a step back and look at the big picture and say, right, this is where we're going. I can't get caught into this detail because there's so much detail going on.
Yeah, I think if I look at where I need the business to grow and the journey, the roadmap to get there, I kind of know. So, for example, if I know I wanted to put certain boutiques in certain cities, you get a feel for what cities you want to be in or where you want to grow the business in certain key parts geographically. But then we're quite analytical as well. So I think we have this nice marriage of the creative side coming with the analytical side, not just talking about development of the network, but also in terms of like our total approach to how we operationalize IWC. We have this fusion between doing things that have never been done before, that are totally creative, that are bits breaking the mold in terms of what the industry's done previously, but then having this really analytical part which says, okay, if we do it, how are we going to analyze it? And it's not necessarily about return on investment, but it could be about reach. It could be there's multiple different measurements that we use to kind of take a step back and go, did that work? Should we do it again? How can we learn from that? And I think that's a continuous journey for us. And so by doing that, it feels like we're making progress.
Yeah, absolutely. You've obviously within a business, especially as a director, you're going to face difficulties, and you're going to, as you said yourself, you need to allow me to fail. Yeah. I can see you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I can see you being someone that's maybe quite hard on themselves when something goes wrong. How would you deal with that? I know that you're a keen runner. Yeah. Is that your kind of release?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that, and trying to keep some level of fitness as well. I can't run in the mornings. Everyone says, how can you run at night? I can't, because I lose all my energy in the morning. I need to come into work full of energy and full of, try to give it my all. Yeah. And then the only time, by the time we've got the kids to bed and, everything's cleaned up and you're ready, that's the only kind of downtime that I have. So for me, it's a good, I don't go for big long runs. It's just 5K. But for me, it's a good way to clear.
For me, that's a lot, though.
Well, for me, it's just a way of clearing my head. You can just, get some fresh air. You feel like you're getting some. I think it's quite good for the mental health.
Yeah, it's when we had a gentleman called Ali Houston on the podcast. Yeah, and he is a keto and paleo expert. Oh, wow. And he was explaining that basically you have two methods of burning energy. Yeah. You have your straight to your fat reserves, which is when you're in ketosis. Yeah. So you're burning with ketones. Yeah. And you also have like carbs, breaking down sugars and carbs. Sure. And so they're two separate energy sources. And what he described is, if you switch to a keto diet, it can change basically the chemicals in your brain can become a bit different, and it can make you feel a lot clearer. Yeah. A bit like going a run, you feel great after it. Yeah. Did you stick to a certain diet, or what's the?
Not really. And I hate going for the run, to be honest. I mean, it sounds quite sadistic, but as you quite rightly said, you feel great afterwards.
Yeah.
But I don't go every night, probably 4 or 5 times a week, but it's a real forcing myself to do it. And I just say to myself, you've got no choice, you've got to do it. And I think as long as I get into that zone, you just do it. And then once you're out, if your mind drifts on, I think that's quite a nice place to be. And then come back, you feel refreshed. And
Are you goal orientated?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Definitely.
really target orientated. Yeah.
Yeah, even with your runs.
No, but with work particularly.
Yeah.
Actually, less so with family life and fitness and social, etc.
Sort of segregate it.
Yeah, but when it comes to work, like massively target orientated.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm really analytical, like beyond analytical when it comes to the way we approach stuff.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I was thinking about what we were doing with the YouTube channel that we're working on, and it does go down to the granular detail of retention rates and exactly the 30-second period where somebody dropped off and why did they drop off, and then we go into it's just interesting how. But
it's good to know that. I think the key there is agility. And being able to adapt or being able to go, okay, that's without overthinking it. I think data's great, but sometimes we have so much data. What do we really do with it? I think it's the important to kind of understand how it can be, and it's difficult how it can be insightful and helpful versus, okay, it's just another data point. It's another tick box exercise.
I already knew it.
Yeah, you already know it. Yeah, exactly. Just reinforce what you already knew.
IWC obviously have an affinity to racing, and you've got Lewis Hamilton as your ambassador, quite rightly so,
and George Russell,
and how does it kind of help that you have a passion for racing yourself?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, I think because I'm fascinated with this, motorsport. I think is I just think it's the pinnacle or Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport, and they're constantly thinking about how they can generate an extra 1/10 of a second, over 75, 80 laps or whatever it may be. I just think it's fascinating, and that level of engineering and that working together as a team and striving for becoming the best that they can possibly be, and I see a lot of crossover between what Toto does with his team and Chris. And Toto and Chris, there's a real friendship, there's a real kinship there. I think Chris would be the first to say Toto's his mentor as well. So you feel that connection, and we feel that when we do activations or if we're at the Formula One in Silverstone, you really feel not like you're a commercial sponsor with IWC. It feels way more connected when you're at the Formula One. You can get into the pitch, you can talk to the engineers, and they're all wearing the watches, but they're just as geeky about watches as we're geeky about understanding how they're managing their tires or their race strategy, etc. So it definitely feels like a really strong, authentic relationship.
And in terms of that ambassador, so you've got these two brilliant racing drivers.
Yeah.
Do people come into the boutique? I've always wondered this. Do they specifically say, "Oh, what does Lewis Hamilton have on"? Is that like a question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. Actually, George, unannounced, has come into New Bond Street a couple of times. And just walked in, and I think I remember a couple of times he just wanted to do a strap change, or he wanted to try on a new watch because he knew it had come out, and I think he was speaking to HQ about getting it in the future, and wanted to see what it looked like on the wrist. And he's, just really down to earth, easygoing, really passionate about watches, and just one of the nicest guys I've ever met.
Listen, guys, I need to say something really quickly. I need to say a huge thank you for all your support on this podcast. If you could quickly do me a favor and hit that like button, follow button, subscribe, whatever it is, wherever you're watching this, I would really appreciate it. We're trying to get to our goal of 10,000 subscribers or followers or likes, all that social media stuff. And if you could do that and help us get there, I would honestly really appreciate it. This podcast means a hell of a lot to me. So thank you. So I've got a couple more questions. They're a little more general about the watch industry.
Sure.
Why do you think that watches have such a following behind them?
It feels like, I don't know if you feel the same way. It feels over the last 5 or so years much more than it did before, or maybe that's because I'm now in the industry, and I saw it from someone an outsider that just loved the hobby. That it's definitely felt the brand awareness or the passion behind watches has definitely increased. That's how I feel anyway. I think there's an element of people feeling like it's a commodity, which I think is personally is good and bad. If you're investing your hard-earned money into a product, you don't want it to lose half its value the moment you've put it on your wrist. But at the same time, I feel that pendulum swung a bit too far. I think celebrities, Instagram, social media, I think that's all had a key part to play in terms of the watch industry getting this massive influx of attention, which I think on the whole is really healthy for the business. And at least what I'm very conscious of is not coming, we've got the people that have been very loyal to the brand for years and years and years, and not kind of putting them off us, but trying to make the brands more open and, reaching out to new people that perhaps haven't had an experience of the brand, I think is quite key.
Yeah. Because it has, I think that I've seen, specifically in IWC actually, but not just IWC, I've seen a growth in the watch community, you could call it. I remember before, when I was into watches, it was very much forum based. I'm not sure if you remember those days.
Yeah, sure.
Back in my day, it was very much forum based. Then it took to YouTube. Then it went to Instagram. And there's these huge accounts with huge followings like Nico Leonard, like our friend Adrian, who's coming on the podcast next week or this week. Do you think they've made it cool in a way?
Yeah, I think so. I think the visual element of YouTube and Instagram, I think, has played a key part. And I think Chris is quite visual as well. So, I think he's always keen to kind of put the latest watch on his wrist and for people to see it. And this ability to kind of dress up, dress down, have fun with it. I mean, the watch that I'm wearing today, the map watch, the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Pilot's Chronograph, which is bit of a long-winded word. I shouldn't say that. But having a playful colours, with the coloured rubber strap that you can take off in a second. You've got the easy exchange. You can literally take it off in a second and put a nice black fabric strap. I think the industry's become a bit more playful and a bit less serious, which I think is really important to kind of bring on new people that haven't perhaps had an experience with a luxury watch before.
Yeah. And where do you see the luxury industry going? Because I was quite shocked after COVID hit. Buchanan Street, which is the main, for any listeners out there, the kind of main street in Glasgow, or it is the main street in Glasgow. There were so many empty spaces, derelict buildings, because the businesses couldn't cope. And then all of a sudden you had, I won't name the luxury watch brands, but you had 1, 2, 3, 4, all opening up within a year, all luxury watch brands. It seems like the industry kind of boomed over COVID. Do you think that COVID had an impact, like more people got into the industry over COVID?
I think that, at least my perception is they had a bit more time on their hands, and I think that's where YouTube and Instagram really flourished, because they had much more of a captive audience, and people were spending more time looking at their phones and consuming this, and I think that's had a ripple effect, and I think the interest and the awareness has been peaked, and then when it all unlocked, people wanted to go and touch and feel and see the physical product that they'd seen on the YouTube video or on Instagram. And I think that correlation then is just a natural consequence of people, then being inquisitive and wanting to go into the boutiques and wanting to put the watch on their wrist and have a chat with someone, what had become a bit of a passion point perhaps over the pandemic period, wanting to go and see people and have a conversation with the salesperson about it, or whoever it may be. I think that's just had an impact. Yeah.
What watches does Grant Wilson have in his collection?
An unhealthy amount. there's quite an unhealthy obsession with watches, which goes before my time at IWC. So there's some, dare I say it, there's some other products that I can't wear anymore that sit in a safe, but sometimes I get them out and look at them and
cradle them.
Yeah, cradle them and then put them back in the safe. No, but there's a few other watches that from prior to my life at IWC. But in terms of IWC, I have also an unhealthy amount of IWCs as well, that over the years that I've been lucky enough to get hands on and acquire. there's not really a theme. I know some other watch, people that collect watches, they go for chronographs or they go for, very classical looks, or they go for, very big case. There's no theme to my watch collection at all. No, I've got a beautiful 1940s IWC Calatrava with a salmon dial that's 34 millimeters, and then I've also got a big Pilot ceramic 46 millimeters. So there's,
mix and match.
Completely. I guess if anything, it's to kind of suit what I guess I try to wear watches that I think work with. I want to say outfit. That sounds really pretentious, but with whatever clothes that I'm wearing, I think there's for me, there's a weekend watch where I can just be in polo shirt and jeans or whatever, and I'll have a watch that I think will nicely match that. And then I can be, suited up and have perhaps a watch that I feel more comfortable wearing with a suit.
You are quite stylized. I've seen that on your Instagram.
No, I don't think so.
I like you like you've got nice shoes, like he's very stylized.
Watches, shoes, cars. There's a trend there. Yeah, I do like shoes.
Yeah, the next will be cameras, and then that'll be all three.
I don't think I can afford that. After you guys told me about lenses and camera prices, unbelievable.
So you were talking about Pilot's watch. So you've got a Pilot's watch in your collection?
I've got a couple of Pilot's watches in the collection. Yeah.
And you were talk me through the relationship between Top Gun and IWC. Yeah,
it dates back quite a few years now. I want to say 2007. Might have to fact check myself there. But it's an authentic relationship that IWC have. Obviously, there's the commercial movie side, but that's all based on the tactical fighters that fight for that train for the US Navy. So the SFTI fighters, and we developed watches that are much more about the pilot and how the pilot will use the watch than really a commercial element to it. So typically they're pressure tested, so the pilots will be going high altitudes and then putting X amount of G-force and then going down, so doing crazy maneuvers in the air, and the sapphire crystal won't pop out, whereas with other watches, they're not tested to that extreme. So typically the Top Gun watches, they're all ceramic watches. And that's just a functionality reason. The pilot will be, throwing around in the cockpit, and it'll be knocking the watch against everything. So having a ceramic watch, it's that scratch resistancy. So a standard steel watch would just get battered in a cockpit. The dial's quite legible as well. So we've got the really highly visible layout of the dial, so it's at a quick glimpse you can see exactly the time, and I think these are the kind of characteristics that have gone. A lot of that is IWC's DNA, which makes it really relevant for a Top Gun pilot to wear the watch today. And then Chris developed watches to really match the environment that the fighter pilots were in. So things like the Mojave Desert was to blend in with the khaki outfits that the pilots were wearing when they're training in Nevada in the Mojave Desert. So it's really color matched the colored ceramic and the strap and the dial with that Pantone match, really to match the uniforms of the pilots there. And then the Lake Tahoe is exactly the opposite. It's a really contrasting white ceramic watch with the white strap, and again, that's really having that. Yes, there's a street apparel there's a street apparel kind of awareness and desirability to those watches, but they were originally the concept design was for the pilots.
I think when it comes to the watch industry, in a general sense, uniqueness is quite a hard thing to come by, because every watch tells the time. Yeah. And it's a bit like cars. Every car drives from A to B, and they've all got unique little changes and bits about them that kind of separate them from the rest of the industry. You were telling me earlier about Ceratanium.
Yeah.
Can you explain that to me again? Because that was wild. Ceratanium. What is Ceratanium? How did IWC develop that?
Yeah. Well, I think I can't remember if we said it earlier, but IWC's really got a rich history when it comes to case materials. It's for me, it's one of the standout features of what makes the brand quite unique, or what makes an IWC an IWC. And so if you take coloured ceramics, you know, we were one of the first brands, if not the first brand, to do a coloured ceramic watch back in the 80s. It was on a Da Vinci, and we did a beautiful kind of green and a white, and you know, they're actually in our boutique at the moment, so you can come and see them. And really one of the first brands to do coloured ceramics, and obviously ceramic watches really took off, and we've been doing numerous ceramic watches for years now. And there's a big department at HQ at Schaffhausen that's a team of material scientists, and they're constantly working on the next project. So there's a real relationship with ceramic watches, and we've been doing ceramic watches for a number of years. And I guess the next evolution, because we invest so much energy into case materials, and we have a team at Schaffhausen that are constantly thinking about the next evolution of where the next case material will come from and what materials we'll use. And so Ceratanium, I think, was actually, you know, developed about 7 years ago from Lawrence and his team, and it's this fusion between ceramic and titanium. Now, ceramic is a really scratch-resistant property, but God forbid if you ever drop your ceramic watch on a marble floor, which sounds very, you know, unlikely, but you know, ceramic is prone to cracking. And then if you look at titanium is really lightweight but really robust. And so if you fuse the two between ceramic and titanium, you have all of the scratch-resistant properties of ceramic and all of the robust lightness of titanium. So you have the best of both worlds. You have pretty much a bomb-proof watch. And so you're not going to scratch it, you're not going to crack it. On the scale of toughness, it's, you know, it's really up there as one of the most strongest, toughest materials that can be engineered. And it's a hell of a process. You know, it's extreme temperatures. It's applying the ceramic to the titanium. It's not like a fusion of the two metals coming together. It's the ceramic element is, the way Lawrence described it to me, is putting some, you know, bread into a toaster, you know, and as it's toasting, you've got the outer layer is you know, if you're leaving a piece of bread in the toaster for too long, you get the, you know, obviously the burnt on the out, and then you can scrape it off. It's creating this kind of caking of the titanium that gives it that fusion. That's the fusion part.
That's really interesting. No, that was really interesting.
I just figured, did I explain that well at all?
No, I got it. I think the toaster kind of analogy, it works.
It's good when Lawrence does it, isn't it?
And then you've got this incredible innovation that's am I right in saying that IWC own the patent?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you only get that at IWC.
Yeah, you can only get a Ceratanium watch from IWC, and it's even made at Schaffhausen. It's, you know, very expensive form of. You have different grades of titanium, so it's crazy expensive titanium in its raw concept, and then the whole baking process and the fusing process all happens at Schaffhausen as well. So it's a USP. It's patented. It's you can only get a Ceratanium watch from IWC. But it's what's super interesting is what's coming out, which I can't say, but there's, you know,
is there stuff in the pipeline?
Yeah, but stuff that, you know, they're taking stuff that happens in the space industry or stuff, you know, satellite discs, etc., in terms of how they manage extreme heats from, like you were saying about the cameras being able to, the batteries in the cameras being able to take, you know, really extreme heats at both ends of the spectrum. You know, there's materials out there that are being used on satellites which can be manufactured in big, huge processes, but then taking that and putting it into a case material is next level as well. So there's some exciting stuff coming.
What do you think it is about watch collectors and things that they probably will never need or use? Because I love watches that have a huge water resistance, like the one I have on today. And I love watches that have these new innovative materials. Yeah. I'm not in the army. I'm not going to die. What do you think it is? That,
just like to know it can do it. Yeah. You know, I think my watch that I'm wearing now is 100 meters, but, you know, I don't think I've been more than 2 meters underneath the whatever the depth is of a swimming pool. But I think it's just knowing that it can
do it.
It can do it.
Yeah.
I think there's these kind of you like these kind of stories that go. Do you remember that titanium watch, the Titanic watch that came out a few years ago?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
I'm probably going off brand now, but they went down and got a piece of the hull from the Titanic.
Yeah.
And then they brought it up and put elements of it onto the watch. I thought that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. It's almost like getting...
Got a piece of history on your wrist.
Exactly. Or there were certain brands, I won't mention the brands, but they got pieces of planes and they put them into the watches.
Yeah.
And there's other brands that have got some of the stuff from the moon.
Yeah.
They put that in their watches.
Yeah.
And people love the fact that it has that raw material of a passion or a hobby or whatever it is in their brand. It's really fascinating. I think...
Yeah, watch this space. There's some stuff coming on the horizon as well.
Will you tell me after?
I'll tell you what. No, I'll tell you after.
And what in terms of like your day, how do you remain productive throughout? Because to me, you strike me as you're a very detailed guy, and you've got, as you said, analytical, and you stick to a structure. Do you have any tips for productivity in people?
I think first surround yourself with a great team. Because it's not me, it's the team. And first and foremost, that's really is the case. I'm very blessed to have a really great team that are really dedicated. And I guess for my part, it's giving them the vision of where we want to. I think it's important to have a vision. And it sounds quite cliched, but if you haven't got that end goal of what you're trying to achieve, it's quite difficult to know where you're going. So, and then having a bit of a roadmap in terms of what you want to, where all things being perfect, how are you going to get there? But then really know you're going to have agility in that roadmap. You're going to have to be flexible, that from getting from where you are today to where you want to be in a few years' time, it's not going to work the way you expect it. So you have to there's a level of agility there that I think is really important, and being able to be able to manage change and embrace change.
Yeah.
Typically, I never thought I was a person that really embraces change. I quite like my processes, my structure, but one of the things that being in this job has taught me is you need to embrace it. Get on board with it. There's new technologies. There's new ways of communicating. There's new ways of doing business. And the pandemic definitely taught us a lot on that front. And I think if you really embrace that, then you can be one of the first. I always think it's better to be first than it is to
not be first.
Or you can do it the slow and steady, and I just feel there's a lot of collateral in being one of the first, and I think that also that kind of comes from Chris, our CEO's kind of he was when we did. Do you remember with Clubhouse? It's kind of gone now, but was Clubhouse was big. I don't know any other brand that jumped on Clubhouse as quickly as Chris. I remember him phoning a few of us up and said, let's just test it, see where it goes. And I found it at the beginning quite bizarre because we weren't even talking, watches was never mentioned. It was, an hour with Chris talking to one of the friends of the brands about what their passions were, what they've done, what they've achieved. And, and occasionally Chris would kind of bring it in, what we've done at IWC, etc. But the majority of the conversation wasn't even talking about watches, but it was, he was really quick to embrace a new form of communication. And there's lots of stuff like that Chris has done. And I think that kind of trickles down to all of us.
Yeah. And do you think there's anything from Chris that you've learned over working? How long have you worked with Chris?
So 3.5 years.
3.5 years.
Yeah.
Learn anything from him?
Well, I think Chris he's very English, although he's German. He's
English German.
Very, very. He has a real affinity and love for the UK. His wife's British. His kids are kind of British as well. Lived in the UK for a long time. Went to UK in university. So you can't fool it. You can't trick him. He knows the English way of life or the British way of life really well. And I think that's a great, from a UK perspective, that's a real asset to have. Because he understands the mentality, the culture, where we want to go. He understands the base point of where the brand is today, but also where we need the brand to be. So, and he's super creative. Obviously studied architecture at university. So you see that now translate into some of his vision into either the manufacturing facility in Schaffhausen or some of the boutiques and his use of elevation, etc. And he's much more tuned into that than I think anybody else. But he he's very easygoing. You know, he's not. I've been with some, previous lives, worked for some other bosses, and he's much more easygoing than anybody else I've worked with.
Yeah. And it was funny, we're talking about innovation and change, and it's always better to be ahead of the kind of curve, so to speak. It's better to be the first one there. And I was thinking about a kind of real legend in the industry, Jean-Claude Biver.
Sure.
And how he took over. There was what was there, Tag Heuer,
Amiga,
Hublot,
yeah.
And he really revolutionized those things.
Yeah.
But what he always had with him was a team.
Yeah.
And he would always go into a brand and he would need either the same team, or he would jiggery pokery around and make sure that some of the members from his team were there, because you always need somebody around you. So it was interesting. I was thinking of that when you were mentioning your team. What advice for someone going into your role or pursuing a career within the watch industry and wanting to work their way up the ranks, so to speak?
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Do your research. Be passionate. Do more than what's expected of you, even if it's the interview process. I think that's served me personally quite well. Show a real interest in what you're doing and what you want to do and how you would approach it. And I think passion is the one big thing that we always say we can't teach.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Good. Well, listen, I really appreciate the conversation, Grant, and it's been incredible to get to know you in a little bit more detail. Get the ins and outs of the watch industry. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Into the Mind podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider hitting that subscribe button, follow button, 5-star button, whatever it is, wherever you are. I would really appreciate it. This podcast means a hell of a lot. And our goal, as I said before, is to hit 10,000 subscribers or followers, whatever it is. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you soon.